Let us pray. Our Father, keep us mindful of the special and unique opportunity we have to work for our constituents and our province, and in that work give us both strength and wisdom. Amen.
Introduction of visitors. Presenting petitions.
Member for Drumheller.
Mr. Speaker, I wish to present the following petitions that have been received for private bills. The petition of James F. Kalmakoff for the Security Home Trust Company Act. The petition of Cameron Milliken for the Fair and Milliken Insurance Company Act. The petition of Hermo T. Padigan for the Hermo T. Padigan Bar Admission Act.
Member for Westlock Sturgeon.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I wish to present a petition bearing 2,450 signatures of Albertans from all corners of the province, calling on this Assembly to recommend all-party hearings on the Meech Lake Accord. This petition lists specific concerns about the Accord and which the petitioners wish to see addressed in the all-party hearings.
Reading and receiving petitions. Presenting reports by standing and special committees.
Culture, multiculturalism.
Mr. Speaker, as chairman of the Select Committee on Legislative Offices, I am pleased to table copies of the 1987 Select Special Ombudsman Search Committee report, which was distributed to all members on September 11, 1987, and as adopted by the Special Standing Committee.
Notices of motions. Introduction of bills. Tabling returns and reports. Introduction of special guests.
Deputy Premier, followed by...
Mr. Speaker, on behalf of my colleague, the Minister of Federal and Intergovernmental Affairs, I'd like to introduce a guest who's sitting in your gallery today, Mr. David McFadden, a former member of the Provincial Parliament from Ontario. Mr. McFadden.
Calgary Milliken.
Mr. Speaker, I'm very delighted today to introduce to you and through you to the members of this legislature 13 real energetic members of the 41st Trinity United Scout Troop from beautiful Calgary. They came all the way to be here with us today, and we even took them out and had a little visit to the West Edmonton Mall. They're accompanied by Olakila, Bob Coburn, and then we've got Hawkeye, which for the Beaver Group, which is Terrence Robinson and his wife Jane, and they're also accompanied by one of their senior scouters, Donovan Johnson. And I'd like for them to rise and receive the traditional warm welcome of the legislature.
Calgary Forest Lawn, followed by the Minister of Municipal Affairs.
Mr. Speaker, on behalf of my colleague from Calgary Mountain View, I'd like to welcome through you and to the members of the legislature through you, 11 students from Rundle College in Calgary. They're accompanied today by their teachers, Mr. Frank Wright and Mr. Don Franklin. I'd ask that they rise and receive the typical warm welcome of the House.
Minister of Municipal Affairs.
Mr. Speaker, it's my great pleasure to introduce to you and to members of the Assembly 5 prominent Albertans who in their own right should be recognized, but are here today in their first day of meetings as members of the Municipal Statutes Review Committee, which will review all municipal legislation to make sure it gets into the 21st century at the same time we do. Mr. Speaker, these people are seated in the members' gallery, and the chairman of the committee is seated here in the Assembly, the member for Calgary-McKnight. They are, and I'd ask them to stand as I mention their names, Gary Browning, Ross Elger, Dick Papworth, Ty Lund, and Robert Matheson. I'd ask that we thank them for their contribution to the province and to the Municipal Statutes Review Committee.
Member for Vegreville.
Дякую, пан спікер. Сьогодні я є дуже веселий привітати моїх senior citizens, приятелів з Vegreville. Mr. Speaker, I'm pleased to introduce to you and to members of the Assembly 47 friends of mine from the Vegreville Senior Citizen Sunshine Club. This group recently moved into their beautiful new drop-in center in Vegreville, funded with assistance through 3 levels of government, particularly noting the Recreation Parks and Wildlife Foundation and a great amount of volunteer effort and local fundraising. They're seated in the public gallery accompanied by their bus driver, Mr. Oris Zabretsky, and I would ask that they stand in the gallery and receive the traditional warm welcome of members of the Assembly.
Member for Whitecourt.
Mr. Speaker, it's my pleasure today to introduce to you some 39 grade 8 students from the Sangado High School. They're accompanied here by their teachers, Robert White, Robert Morton, and 2 parents, Mrs. Bacus and Mrs. Morgenstern. I met with them a while ago, and they were so excited and pleased with this building, they didn't even have any questions for me. They're seated in the members' gallery, and I would ask that they rise and receive the warm welcome of this assembly.
Member for Red Deer North.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It's a pleasure to introduce today some students from a social studies class from People's Christian Academy in Red Deer, here working on a government study. And I'm pleased to announce on a historical note, one of the students is a direct descendant of the very first MLA from Red Deer North. On that note, I'd like to ask my son and the other students and their teacher, Mrs. Casimir, to rise and receive the welcome of this house.
Ministerial statements. Oral question period.
Mr. Speaker, I'd like to direct the first question to the Premier. Mr. Speaker, yesterday the Premier finally admitted that natural gas producers will have to eat the FERC decision, Mr. Speaker. And Mr. Speaker, clearly he said in the spring that he would not accept this agreement if that FERC decision stood. Now he's backing off. It seems, Mr. Speaker, this Premier is going to support the Mulroney trade deal come hell or high water, whether it's good for Alberta or not. Right. Mr. Speaker, my question is to the Premier. Can the Premier confirm that he now purports to justify his position by stating that gas producers will be able to appeal the next non-tariff barrier brought in by the United States?
Mr. Speaker, as I said last year, as I've said twice so far this year, the trade agreement, which I am supporting, is one that will deal with FERC decisions. Once we have that agreement, it's what I said before, and that's one of the reasons why we're supporting it.
Mr. Speaker, it's nice that the Premier has such blind, naive faith in both Mr. Mulroney and the binational process. Let's look at that, Mr. Speaker. Will the Premier confirm that only the Government of Canada can appeal to the binational process, not the Government of Alberta or any other private group?
Mr. Speaker, the agreement obviously is between 2 governments, the Government of Canada and the Government of the United States, and therefore one of the members of the agreement can appeal. But obviously, Mr. Speaker, would have to be a large input from the province of Alberta in a matter such as this, and that would happen.
Again, Mr. Speaker, blind faith, Mr. Speaker. My question then to this Premier, the panels must rule only on U.S. law and U.S. precedent. And my question to the Premier, does the Premier really believe that the Americans routinely break their own laws, and that, in fact, when they bring in decisions like FERC or any other protectionist measures, that they're breaking their own laws? Does he really believe that?
Again, it's funny, Mr. Speaker, because I dealt with that yesterday and the day before. And again, it's the point that the dispute settling mechanism, Mr. Speaker, will stop any capricious, frivolous, or politically motivated charges or moves by the federal government in the U.S. federal government in a harassing way. And we believe, Mr. Speaker, that the dispute settling mechanism will stop those.
Mr. Speaker, I don't care what this Premier believes. We're trying to get to the facts here, Mr. Speaker. Right. And clearly under there it says that they have to break their own laws or their own precedents. Right. And my question is to the Premier then. Does he really believe that this binational process would stop any decisions like FERC or softwood lumber or potash or any of the things that they've been doing to us? Does he really naively believe that, Mr. Speaker?
Mr. Speaker, as I've just said, any of those moves that are developed from a capricious, harassing way, politically motivated, would definitely be stopped, because they know if they brought one like that, it would be struck down by the dispute settling mechanism. Now, it's interesting that the Honourable Leader of the Opposition knows that without this agreement, we would have absolutely no protection. But he is so wrapped up in trying to kill and hurt something that's an incredible opportunity for Albertans that he can't take the blinkers off. And he's just negative all the time.
Right.
Westlock, Sturgeon.
We had no protection then. We have no protection now with this Premier in the saddle here. Mr. Speaker, the FERC or FERC ruling is $200 million, costing the gas producers $200 million a year, and it goes on forever because, as you said, it was retroactive. Because of our royalty rate, that means $50 million a year, roughly, to the taxpayers of Alberta that's going to go ahead. Now, in point of fact that Mr. Reisman is on the news this morning as saying that they're renegotiating parts of the agreement, and in particular energy, will he not now take that opportunity, take this opportunity to bring forward, to see somehow or another that we can get the FERC ruling deadlined as of now so it won't go on forever?
Mr. Speaker, I guess I've dealt with the FERC matter now for 3 straight days, and the Honourable Leader of the Liberal Party just is unable. I sit there, Mr. Speaker, politely let him ask his questions. When he doesn't like the answer, he can't sit there. Instead, he tries to disrupt the business of the House. And I think it's unfair.
Second main question, Red Deer North, supplementary. Red Deer South, rather.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Supplementary to the Premier. It's nice to hear from the Leader of the Opposition representing Oshawa. And I recognized how closely tied he is with people like Ed Broadbent. But could the Premier comment on why people like Ed Broadbent are coming here to Alberta and telling us that American investment in free trade isn't good for our province, considering what it's done for Oshawa?
The House will continue in due course. Honourable Premier. Prepared at the end of...
Mr. Speaker, I've never seen anybody with skin so thin. I have never seen anybody with skin so thin that if you just prick them with a pin a little bit, they can't stand it. It's just unreal. So let me say, Mr. Speaker, that one of the things that I found interesting to Albertans was the visit to Alberta of people from Oshawa and the vice president of the NDP party, who's a member of the union, auto union, who came here to say to us, we have all the foreign investment in Canada and we have no unemployment, but that would be bad for Alberta. We have trade with the United States and our industry is booming, but that would be bad for Alberta. So what I say to them, Mr. Speaker, stay away. Albertans don't need that kind of unbelievable advice.
Mr. Speaker, this type of absolute rhetoric.
Order, please. Order. The member has been recognized. Now the second main question for the Leader of the Opposition.
Well, only fair play, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to designate my second question to the member from Edmonton Centre.
Thank you. Mr. Speaker, access to quality reproductive care for women in this province has been seriously eroded by the insensitivity and the cuts of the current Minister of Hospitals and Medical Care. In fact, a woman in my constituency last week could not get a tubal ligation, A, because she did not have her husband's permission, and B, because she did not have a $450 certified check payable to the gynecologist in advance of the procedure. Will the minister end this gross unfairness to women and announce today the reinsurance of contraceptive procedures required by the women of this province?
Mr. Chairman, first of all, I reject totally the preamble to the honourable member's question. We continue to have in this province the finest health care system in Canada without question, and our health care insurance plan covers more items than any other health care plan in Canada by far. Specifically with regard to the sterilization procedures which were removed from coverage by the health care insurance plan on August 1st, I have indicated over the course of the last couple of months that we are monitoring some items that were de-insured to consider or to determine whether or not there are additional charges being levied by doctors for those types of operations that were performed previously at a fixed fee under the health care insurance plan. With regard to tubal ligations, the cost under what the health care insurance plan paid was about $216, about $175 for vasectomies, and it's our intention over the course of the next couple of months at least to continue that monitoring. We do it by way of getting information from patients about what they have paid for the actual operation, and if the honourable member or other honourable members do have information about what the costs are, I'd be very happy to receive it. It will assist us in monitoring the situation.
Mr. Speaker, this determination, this monitoring has already been going on by local boards of health, by Planned Parenthood, by health coalitions and other women's groups. Does the minister not trust these groups which already have these reports and information and not trust their evidence which is already in, demonstrating the increased cost to women out of pocket?
Well, so far I've not received from all the groups the honourable member mentioned information that provides exact figures of what doctors might be charging in these areas. I would be happy to receive it, and all the additional information that I get would be helpful. One of the things that often happens is an individual will phone my office or write and say, we've talked to the doctor and they've said this is what they're going to charge, and then it turns out that they go somewhere else and wind up getting the operation for the same price that was paid by the health care insurance plan prior to August 1st. So it's a little too early in my view to accuse the medical profession across the board of having doubled their fees for tubal ligations. That appears to be the case in some circumstances, but in other areas it appears not to be. So anything the honourable member can provide me by way of exact specifics would be very helpful.
Well, Mr. Speaker, we can certainly provide the minister with lots of information from our offices. I'm surprised he hasn't heard. Does he need some horror story? What sort of horror story does a minister need of the unfairness of the situation? Would you want the increase in the rates of hysterectomy, increase in the number of unwanted pregnancies, increase in perinatal costs, increase in tubal ligation fee to what, $600 or $700 before you do something about this?
I failed to detect a question in that last comment.
What will it take to get action?
I guess. Well, the young men and women of this province who are listening and watching to that lack of response know where this minister is coming from. When he finally gets around to reinsuring these contraceptive services, will the minister then reimburse the women who are already out of pocket for these expenses, the women who have been used as guinea pigs in his experiments in de-insuring?
Mr. Speaker, I have already said that it's our intention to continue monitoring the situation to determine whether, in fact, an unfairness has been created. That information was communicated by the minister responsible for women's issues to the chairman of the Women's Council just a couple of days ago. It probably gave rise to the honourable member's sudden concern. And we will continue to monitor the situation over the course of at least the next couple of months and then make a decision based on the information we have.
Additional supplementary, Edmonton Centre, is that 3? Edmonton Goldbar.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Supplementary to the minister, yesterday we did have indeed the minister responsible for women's affairs response to the Advisory Council on Women's Affairs and relating to this same subject. Will the minister now please tell this assembly, yes or no, will funding be made available to the Royal Alexandra Hospital in Edmonton now to establish a family planning clinic?
Again, this is the first time that we've heard from the honourable member that indeed a family planning clinic is required at the Royal Alexandra Hospital. Previous to now, the honourable member and others have wanted this government to fund an abortion clinic at the Royal Alex Hospital, and the answer to that was a flat no. We suggested if the Royal Alex thought that that was important, they could fund it from within their own funds. Since that time, I've had an opportunity to discuss this matter with the chairman of the board of the Royal Alex Hospital, and I've asked them if they would consider establishing a family planning clinic, which would do a great deal more than might have been done by an abortion clinic. And the answer from the chairman of the board of the Royal Alex is yes, they would consider that. They're now in the process of reviewing how it might be set up, whether or not there's room for it in the hospital, how it might operate, and we will have discussions after they've completed that work, probably early in 1988, relative to whether or not it can be funded from their existing global budget or other arrangements made for the next fiscal year.
2 additional supplementaries. Main question, Leader of the Liberal Caucus.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My question is to the Premier on certain aspects on free trade that have concerned many Albertans. As the Premier pointed out earlier, it is possible for the U.S. to put countervail because what they believe may be unfair subsidies on some of our products down the road. So I think it's quite a duty, Mr. Speaker, to this government to make sure that the millions of dollars that taxpayers' money may not be put at risk be put into some of these projects that we'll be exporting to the U.S., which have been put together by guarantees or loans or grants from the Alberta government. Now, first question, Mr. Speaker, is with respect to the Miller or the Whitecourt pulp mill that's going ahead out here. We would have, the Alberta government will have at risk in excess of $100 million there. Is the Premier able to assure us that that risk or that financing that we've done for the pulp mill will not be considered a subsidy and be countervailed by the U.S.? Has he had any assurances that our $100 million plus is not at risk here?
Mr. Speaker, I wouldn't want to try and give legal opinions for the honourable member, but I would certainly say that it would be my understanding from the negotiations and agreement that we've been developing that there would be no risk there.
Mr. Speaker, I think we're going, for $100 million, we need a little bit more than an understanding, but let's go on. So, for instance, on the upgrader, although I understand that the Hong Kong market might have jeopardized the possibility of that going ahead, the crash of the Hong Kong market, there nevertheless has been assurance given from time to time by the Premier that we could be upwards of close to $1 billion at risk by the Alberta taxpayers in putting this upgrader plant together. Now, has he taken any precautions here to make sure that after putting the money in and building the plant, the U.S. won't countervail us because it's unfairly subsidized?
Well, Mr. Speaker, obviously a very hypothetical situation.
Mr. Speaker, I thought that was a cornerstone of his policy. He was going to go down in history for generations because he built the upgrader on his own, if nothing else. Now he says it's hypothetical. Well, let's go on to another one, Mr. Speaker. With respect to the magnesite, or I think people more popularly call it the magnesium plant that's going into the High River area. I believe that, Mr. Premier, we have guaranteed $265 million in loans to this plant. That's a $265 million subsidy. Is there any, has he taken any precautions to make sure that our 265 won't go down the drain there if the U.S. decides to countervail our magnesium exports?
Well, Mr. Speaker, it is not a subsidy. It's interesting to have the Liberal Party of Alberta taking the case to somehow argue something for the United States.
Mr. Speaker, just the last question then. In view of this, the Miller subsidy, in view of the upgrader, in view of the magnesite, these are just a small group that come out close to $2 billion of taxpayers at risk. Will he assure the House that he'll at least, as he said he wasn't a legal expert, will he at least get an independent legal opinion that it is safe to put these investments forward and that they do not conflict with our free trade agreement?
They are safe, Mr. Speaker, and they do not conflict with the free trade agreement.
Leader of the Opposition, supplementary.
Mr. Speaker, to the Premier, in terms of the binational panels dealing with countervailing duties, will the Premier confirm, again, that these binational panels, besides having to rule only on U.S. law and precedent, will be forced to rule only on the administrative record? That is, they will not be able to hear evidence from any of our producers if there's a countervailing duty.
No, Mr. Speaker, I won't confirm that. I will confirm, though, that the agreement does provide that there will be high-level officials of both governments that will be working to rewrite totally the trading rules between our two countries, and that in that rewrite, I would anticipate, Mr. Speaker, that there will not be the type of countervail and anti-dumping laws which currently exist both in Canada and the United States, and that with this rewrite and those laws being removed, there will be a considerably better attitude between the two countries in governing future free trade. And I think, Mr. Speaker, it's important to know that existing laws can't be canceled by agreements. And while Canada's laws have not been changed, nor have the United States laws, because that takes a process through Congress in the United States, of course, through Parliament or legislatures in Canada. And you could not, in the time that we wanted to negotiate this agreement, change the laws of both countries. But the process has started to provide a new set of rules which will be transferred into laws, and then we will have laws that will govern one of the best trading relationships anywhere in the world.
Main question, Leader of the Representative. No, we're just going to be certain the House is. Leader of the Representative Caucus, followed by Red Deer North, followed by Edmonton Strathcona.
Mr. Speaker, my question is to the Premier as well, and it's on the free trade matter, and we've been discussing the dispute settling mechanism. There is concern at the present time that that mechanism may be changed in terms of the discussions and negotiations going on at the present time. Could the Premier indicate that that he has made representation with regards to appeals in terms of the dispute settling mechanism to the various courts, that the Premier is not in favor of that and has made representation to the federal government that should not happen?
Mr. Speaker, we've been meeting on these agreements now for some 18 months, and 9 First Ministers meetings, designated ministers meetings, and officials meetings on almost a daily basis. I confirm to the honourable member that this is definitely being discussed.
Mr. Speaker, supplementary question to the Premier. Could the Premier give us assurance to this legislature that the Government of Alberta's support for the free trade agreement is contingent upon the binational tribunal being the only route of appeal, that any type of a court procedure following that would be unacceptable?
Well, Mr. Speaker, I can't contemplate what might happen in a U.S. court. and therefore I wouldn't want to try and deal with some hypothetical situation that might arise in another country.
Mr. Speaker, to the Premier, I understand that this is a very serious consideration as of today with regards to the binational tribunal and its and the way it can be implemented and how it can be used. My supplementary, Mr. Speaker, Simon Reisman, Canada's trade negotiator, has also raised the possibility that a judicial review of a binational panel decision may be necessary in potential conflict of interest cases involving a member of the panel. Could the Premier indicate whether the government has considered that matter at this time and is prepared to support that in the discussions that are going on, or is that as well unacceptable?
Mr. Speaker, Mr. Reisman says many things, and I do not follow the practice of trying to justify or not his various comments.
Supplementary. Leader of the Opposition, supplementary.
Speaker, in view of the binational panel that this Premier has so much faith in, would the Premier confirm that even if the binational panel rules against the United States can then turn around and change its laws and continue the same countervailing duties? That's clear in that binational panel. In other words, what is this thing worth? It's worth nothing.
It's completely hypothetical, Mr. Speaker, but obviously Canada can change its laws and another country can change their laws. But the Honourable Leader of the Opposition totally misses the point. These are two nations that are coming together to enter into one of the most sought-after trading arrangements that any trading country in the world would like to have. Now, we've been able to obtain one, and it just drives the honourable members crazy because they don't like the word free, and particularly free trade, because it reduces government intervention and government involvement, and that's their philosophy.
Supplementary. Supplementary. Calgary Buffalo.
The Premier, as we anticipate 5 to 7 years of discussions to set new dispute resolution rules, does the Premier anticipate that the federal government will be coming to the provinces for express consent and agreement with respect to legislative changes that will be needed for those new rules over the 5 to 7 years?
Well, Mr. Speaker, there's nothing to say that the rules will take 5 or 7 years to negotiate. It may be done within a year. And I would anticipate there will be lots of discussions between the federal and provincial governments.
Red Deer North, followed by Edmonton Strathcona.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My question's to the Minister of Energy. The Federal Minister of Finance, Mr. Wilson, has introduced some tax proposals which are causing no small amount of concern in the energy sector in Alberta. One of these proposals threatens to end the benefits of flow-through shares. Another one would negatively impact the building of plants and facilities in the province by a reduction in depreciation benefits. I wonder if the Minister has had the opportunity to evaluate the impact that these proposals will have on Alberta's small and junior-sized companies and on the energy sector in general.
Well, Mr. Speaker, we have had a review of the white paper and the impact of the proposed tax reform on the oil and gas industry. And on the conventional industry, overall, it's seen as a slight plus, essentially positive. However, the impact is not that great positively. There's, of course, the reduced corporate tax rates. There's the changes in the capital cost allowance. And the honourable member will remember that when we were trying to get assistance for the oil and gas industry, we were trying to get earned depletion with the pull-through shares for the conventional industry. We were not able to do that. However, we were able to get something very close to it with the CDIP program, the Canadian Exploration and Development Incentive Program. So essentially, we ended up with benefits similar to what were the case for the mining industry. However, the tax reform will be phasing out the CDIP program and the benefits for the mining industry over a period of time. On the non-conventional side, the picture is different in that with the phase out of earned depletion and the so-called put-in-use rule where the capital cost allowance is delayed until the assets are put in use, it does have a significant impact on major projects, possibly up to 3% reduction in the rate of return on some of the major projects. However, we are encouraged by the federal government in their statements that they would, on a case-by-case basis, look to replace the benefits that were taken away by the tax reform white paper. So in our discussions with the federal government on certain projects, we will of course be making a case that they have the obligation to put those benefits back in place before we discuss anything further. So, Mr. Speaker,
perhaps, Honourable Minister, there might be a bit more for some supplementaries. Red Deer North, please.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In light of the fact that the flow-through share benefits brought in some estimated $300 million in investment just last year alone, has the Minister been able to communicate to the Federal Minister of Energy that a loss of investment of that size could negatively affect the drilling of literally hundreds of wells in Western Canada in 1988 alone?
Well, Mr. Speaker, certainly we don't expect an impact, anything near what the honourable member is indicating. The outlook for drilling for the next year looks very good with the fiscal regime that is in place, with the finding costs that their industry is experiencing today, plus the pricing situation. However, we are working with the different umbrella groups in the industry, the Canadian Oil Well Drillers and Contractors Association, who have brought this concern to our attention, as well as the Independent Petroleum Association of Canada just this week, and we'll be working with those groups to see if we can't see that some of these benefits will continue in the future.
Supplementary, Mr. Speaker, is the Minister aware that this type of loss of investment would cause a shift in activity away from the smaller Alberta-based companies which tend to be more labor-intensive and have more impact on local economies?
Well, Mr. Speaker, the concern of the IPAC group, the Independent Petroleum Association this week, as well as the other group that I mentioned, is that some of the smaller companies may experience some difficulty in raising money for exploration and development. And it's for that reason that we would be working with these organizations to see if we can't have the federal government continue to provide similar benefits that are in place now.
Supplementary, Mr. Speaker, to the provincial treasurer, I have a nagging fear, which I hope is unfounded, that we're seeing some Eastern interests again causing some things to happen which could hurt investment in the oil industry. I wonder if the provincial treasurer has taken the opportunity to formally list the concerns that the energy sector has with these proposals and presented them to Mr. Wilson, and if not, when does he propose to do so?
Mr. Speaker, I appreciate the concern expressed by the member for Red Deer North on this important issue, and I think the response by my colleague, the Minister of Energy, has adequately covered our policy response. I do appreciate and will convey to the Minister of Finance on behalf of the member from Red Deer North the views that he's expressed. I do share the point, though, that there could well be some negative investment impact on some of the smaller companies, as he's noted. And yes, we will both be conveying the message from the member, and we'll make a formal presentation to Mr. Wilson on December the 9th and 10th when the finance ministers convene in Toronto.
Member for supplementary, Calgary-Buffalo.
Yes, it'd be nice to see the government use some newfound negotiating skills to get some concessions in these areas for this province. I have a supplementary for the Minister of Energy with respect to the government's plans to reduce the royalty tax credit down to 50% of royalties to a maximum of $2 million. Will the minister ensure small oil companies that this will be the end of the cuts in that program and that there will be no further cuts in the foreseeable future?
Well, Mr. Speaker, the honourable member is incorrect in his statement as to what we have planned or what we plan on doing. And besides, I fail to see how this question has anything to do with tax reform. So if the honourable member wants to ask a question on Alberta royalties at some stage, I'd be happy to answer him.
The Chair, Calgary Forest Lawn Supplementary.
Mr. Speaker, when is the minister going to admit that his program of royalty reduction has been a failure, that leads only to boom and bust activity in the oil patch and brings no return to the Alberta Treasury?
The honourable member, the honourable member doesn't know what he's talking about.
Edmonton Strathcona, followed by Grand Prairie, Calgary Buffalo, Edmonton Millwoods, Red Deer North, Edmonton Glengarry.
Yes, Mr. Speaker, my question is to the Premier, and I promise to be really positive about this. We were all gratified, Mr. Speaker, when he repeated his assurances that if the government is found responsible for the loss that accrued to investors in two recently notorious companies, that the government would pay up. The findings on which this responsibility is to be based must be made by somebody, and the Premier has mentioned the court, has mentioned the code inquiry, and has mentioned the Ombudsman. Will the finding of negligence by any of these tribunals suffice to base the government's responsibility?
Mr. Speaker, I don't think I should get into that kind of a hypothetical judgment in advance. It wouldn't be helpful. I would tell the honourable member, though, that I appreciate that he's getting more positive.
Positively sick of this garbage.
Mr. Speaker, the Premier has made the undertaking to Albertans in this Assembly and elsewhere, and in particular the investors, of course, and they wish to know whether all he is saying is that if they get a judgment against the government will pay, or whether he is in fact saying that that's not necessary. If Mr. Code makes some statements that help, or the Ombudsman does, that is all that suffices. And I think it's a positive and reasonable request to ask, is all he's saying that if there's a judgment, the government will pay?
Completely hypothetical, I'm sorry, Mr. Speaker.
Something that they haven't seen. But you carry on. Good luck.
Speaker, now perhaps I will not be so positive, Mr. Speaker. Since we expect that when the Premier makes these statements, he means something, and all we are trying to find out is what he means, and is all he is saying that the government will simply pay if they're obliged to pay anyway?
Mr. Speaker, I've dealt with it in the House before. It's in Hansard, and it's there for the honourable member.
Yes, Mr. Speaker. The Premier has made answers before. Whether he dealt with it is another question. But I point out, Mr. Speaker, and request an answer to this question. Mr. Code, as you know, by 223 sub 2 of the Business Corporations Act, may not make findings regarding the government. Mr. Trowick, the Ombudsman, may do nothing else, but his inquiry is in secret. So we won't know what he is doing until it's too late. So how does the government get off the horns of that particular dilemma?
I don't see it, Mr. Speaker, as the horns of a dilemma. Mr. Trewick's investigation is not secret. It is certainly will be carried on by him. He has been ordered by the government to report in public and to this Assembly. He conducted his review because he was ordered by the government. And so, Mr. Speaker, I see no problems at all with the fact that both those investigations will get out all of the information necessary to make any judgments.
Supplementary, Westlock Sturgeon.
To the Premier, Mr. Speaker, in view of the fact that there is this dilemma that's been pointed out by the honourable member for Edmonton Strathcona, and also the fact that the Premier has dodged niftily behind tree to tree here, would the Premier, even at this late hour, consider opening this up to a full court public investigation?
Mr. Speaker, we have.
Member for Grand Prairie, followed by Calgary Buffalo, followed by Mill Woods. Grand Prairie.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My question is to the Minister of Municipal Affairs. My question has to do with his Municipal Involvement Week 1987 program, which involved essay and poster contests for school children throughout Alberta. Two of the 6 winners, Mr. Speaker, Colby Levers and Melissa Thorsner from the Grand Prairie constituency. And on their behalf, I wish to ask the Minister, is the commitment still in place to have these 6 Alberta students visit our capital city and our legislature and receive their awards at some special occasion?
Mr. Speaker, I would appreciate the member previously mentioning to me the fact that those 2 individuals had not received that invitation. As a result of his intervention, I am pleased to inform the House that I've directed the department that we will fulfill fully the commitment made. Thank you.
A supplementary. When would they be coming to the city?
Thank you. Please proceed. Please proceed.
Supplementary, Mr. Speaker. I was wondering if the Minister could tell us when he would be holding this function for these 6 Albertans.
Mr. Speaker, we would naturally want to have the students here during a legislative sitting. Should we manage to finish this one during the calendar year, I would intend to invite them during the spring sitting of next year.
Member for Calgary Buffalo, followed by Edmonton Mill Woods.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. That's a hard act to follow. This is...
Please, honourable member. Order. Order, please. There's a growing tendency in the House to violate both shame, the custom of making, commenting with respect to answers given, whether they're adequate or not, or questions and so forth. It's really better just to get on with the questioning, please.
Here, Mr. Speaker, I'm very contrite. To the Minister of Education, in the budget cuts last year, the Minister of Education ended the Initiation to Teaching project, which provided internship positions for 900 graduate teachers at an annual cost of $14 million. We now have over 5,000 teachers unemployed. The Minister's Department released a report 2 days ago, which I have a copy here, indicating that the intern program should continue and that by September 1988, every beginning teacher should be required to participate in such a program. I'm wondering whether the Minister could advise this House whether, in light of this report sponsored by our own department, whether the Minister will admit that the termination of the program was a short-sighted mistake and move to reinstate the program effective September of 1988 as recommended.
Mr. Speaker, the analysis of the Initiation to Teaching project was done independently by 2 people from universities in Alberta. I'm very pleased with the results which have come in terms of the importance of making the important link between the university environment and the classroom environment. How we best implement that in an economic restraint time is a question which is obviously before me as Minister and as our government, and I will make no such commitment today to the honourable member.
Yes, to the Minister, school boards and teachers have been expressing alarm at the effect which staff cuts in schools are having on the quality of education. Why won't the Minister recognize that this intern program is an excellent way of maintaining quality of education and providing teaching jobs for an annual cost only slightly more than that expended for the government to open up its opulent Calgary headquarters?
Mr. Speaker, the quality of teachers in this province is second to none in Canada, certainly. We have the youngest teaching force in Canada and the most highly educated teaching force. Obviously, we want to be sure that we can get as many jobs in our school system for young, graduating, enthusiastic teachers in order that they can be in our classrooms. How we do that is exactly why I am assessing so carefully the results of the analysis of the Initiation to Teaching project. It was a very forward-looking project which was put in place by this government, and I think we've got a good deal we can learn from it.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Programs for children with learning disabilities and handicaps have been amongst the primary victims of the staff cuts. I'm wondering whether the minister will tell us what plans she has to ensure we stop the decline and get some improvements in the quality of education for these learning disabled and handicapped children.
Mr. Speaker, as I have said on many occasions in this legislature, the difficult decision we had to make last year as a government with respect to our natural resource revenue falling off by 64% was how we would apportion that, particularly in the key people areas, of which education is one. Special education, as I've said many times in the Assembly, was not reduced in the 87-88 budget to recognize the important leadership role Alberta has taken in developing special education programs in our classes. I recognize that the size of some classes in Alberta has been changed as a result of economic restraint, but not all. And nor should the honourable member fall into the trap of thinking that class size of itself is the only measure of what is delivered in our classes across Alberta. Quality of education, I would suggest, has many more factors than simply the size of a classroom. In fact, there is no consistent evidence that the size of classrooms of itself is a major factor in quality.
Final supplementary to the Premier, if I might, Mr. Speaker. We all realize that we've been going through some budget difficulties, but my concern is that the percentage of total government expenditure on education has dropped from 14.6% to 12.2%, about 15% between 1979-80 and this year. Why has the government been decreasing its commitment to education on a proportional basis at the same time as the Premier states that education is our #1 priority?
Mr. Speaker, I think it should be clear to the House that this government commits more funds to education than any province in Canada.
Final supplementary? Third? No, that was a Chair recognizes Edmonton Millwoods.
Mr. Speaker, my question today is to the Minister of Advanced Education. Faced with the cutbacks of this provincial government, the University of Calgary now is proposing to cap its enrollment for 1988. The University of Alberta has accomplished almost the same outcome by raising the entrance requirements, and they're looking at having 700 fewer students registering in 1988. We had the University of Lethbridge representatives here discussing their concerns. The minister couldn't even show up for that debate. But in light of all that, could the minister now give us the advice that he's prepared to give to the young people of Alberta who are not going to be able to get into the universities or the colleges? What is his advice to those people? Are they going to have any future other than future clients for his colleague, the Minister of Work for Welfare?
With respect, Honourable Minister, for half a moment. Might we have permission of the House to complete this set of questions since the question period has expired? Opposed? Thank you. The Chair would also point out it's inappropriate to comment on whether a member is in the House or not in the House at any time. Minister?
Well, Mr. Speaker, there were several issues raised in the honourable member's question. First of all, with respect to what advice would I give to young people entering the post-secondary system, I think first of all I'd point out to them this government's commitment to the system, that it funds it at a higher level than any other provincial government, and at the same time keeps tuition fees lower than any other government outside of the province of Quebec. So I would give them that advice. I would also point out to them the excellent choice of institutions that are available. With respect to the ceilings and quotas imposed by the two universities, Calgary and Alberta, the final result of this, of course, will be known this fall when we compare the method by which they propose to reach those quotas with respect to the actual objective in mind. By objective, I mean the numerical target. I'm specifically mentioning that point because the quota system, as it's proposed to relate to an admission requirement, has in fact been there for several years. And in many faculties, the minimum entrance requirement already exceeds the proposed new entrance requirement. So we're not just sure yet the number of students that may be affected by those quotas. That applies to the University of Alberta. With respect to the University of Calgary, they have qualified their statement with respect to quotas with a clause on increased financial support, and it's too soon yet to say whether that may or may not be coming. But that is one option that the government will be looking at when we finalize the department's budget. The last thing, Mr. Speaker, that should be mentioned is the capability of the system to deliver university transfer courses in the college system.
Supplementary question, Mr. Speaker. The minister just referred to the college system. Can the minister now stand in his place and suggest or assure the people of this province, and in particular the colleges who are going to be trying to take the overflow or the turn away from the universities, thanks to his policies, that they can expect more than simply zero change in their budget for this year? Can they expect an inflation increase and hopefully some real increase in their purchasing power for next year?
Well, Mr. Speaker, those questions and others will be answered when the Honourable Treasurer brings down his budget.
Supplementary question, Mr. Speaker. The minister is aware, as we've heard in the news media recently, that the government has been fortunate in having some extra revenue now that they weren't aware of earlier. In light of those circumstances, has the Minister of Advanced Education given any consideration to meeting some of the special requests of the institutions of this province, including but not limited to the urgent request of the University of Alberta for $1 million to support the extra 1,000 students enrolled this year?
Well, Mr. Speaker, I think, again, it should be clarified that this windfall or extra revenue that the opposition refers to simply means that our proposed debt is smaller than what we originally thought it was going to be. So I'm not quite sure how the honourable member is suggesting that that, quote, windfall be spent when it's simply a smaller debt than what was proposed.
For the election.
Member Meyer Horowitz. Mr. Speaker, the demand for student loans for students going through the system now has increased steadily, nearly tripled in the last 5 years, and yet in this last budget year the amount provided was cut by about 10%. In conjunction with increasing fees and reductions, would the minister not agree that continually making these disparities is only going to lead to a two-tier system where only the wealthy will be able to get access to the university system?
No, I think the statistics and data from the Student Finance Board would certainly put down that argument very quickly.
To supplementary Vermilion Viking, followed by Calgary Buffalo.
Yes, to the Minister, a supplemental. In spite of the insinuation by the honourable member that there is going to be a shortage of classroom space in post-secondary education, indeed, there seems to be a great number of classroom spaces, especially in our colleges and that, and there is a concern that we do get duplication and competition for student numbers in certain areas. Could the minister indicate if there's any thought by the department at looking at some rationalization and cutting down on the duplication of colleges competing for those positions?
Yes, there is, Mr. Speaker, and I'm very pleased that that's been one positive response that has come out of this period of fiscal restraint, in that the system itself now is very anxious to identify that list of duplications or non-productive competitions by way of duplications in courses, and I'm very optimistic that during the coming years we're going to make significant progress.
Calgary Buffalo, supplementary.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The statistics for advanced education are similar to those in education. They show a decline in percentage of 10.1% down to 8.7% in expenditures on advanced education from 1979 to this year. And in fact, they went down 15% over the last year. I'm wondering whether the minister can do better than the Premier in explaining how the government can at the same time... I'm wondering whether the minister can explain how this is happening, why the government is decreasing its percentage of expenditures to advanced education at the same time as it says that education is our #1 priority. Those two features are inconsistent with each other.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I don't know what the document was that the honourable member had in his hands, or the percentage of what he was talking about. Certainly in any contemporary government that introduces new programs and expends its global budgeting, the percentage given to any individual department or program can continually go down as a percentage of the gross if the whole pie is continually growing, notwithstanding the fact that the piece of pie continues to grow within the whole. So that's a fallacious argument that has been dealt with on several previous occasions. But yeah, Premier Manning, I think, used to talk about those kinds of things. Yeah, when I sat right where you... I'm sorry, I thought I just discovered perpetual motion. It's the Honourable Leader of the Liberal Party's mouth. But the preference and the importance attached to education, I think, as a part of our budget is there in hard figures. For my colleagues' department in the basic education system, those cuts were at 2%, whereas the other granting agencies were at 3%, and then the rest of the departments throughout government went all the way up to 25%. So certainly that importance and priority is attached to education. There's no doubt about it.
Orders of the day. Point of order.
Mr. Speaker, actually I had two. They go with the same event.